Good afternoon, everyone. We're just about ready to get underway. I'm Greg Gerdell. I'm on the council that conjured up this year's programs. And I would like, I was not a great contributor, but up a little, here we go. All right, I'm Greg Gerdell, and the council has conjured up, I think, quite an excellent program this year. And I am happy to introduce to you today's presenter, Chris Hadsell, whom I worked together with a few decades ago in the formative years of the Vermont Museum and Gallery Alliance, in which we were both quite involved. I was through the Department of Tourism in those days. But without further, I think Chris can give you more perspective on her more recent experiences and the program she's going to present.
Let me just say something before Chris does.
Yes.
Hi, welcome everybody. Just wanted to make sure, I don't know if you all got our email today about the change in our location beginning next week. If you haven't gotten the email, talk to Marge out front and we can make sure we add you to the list. Because how busy the sessions have been and crowded, and technical challenges, as what happened last week. We are moving up to Vermont College, the old Vermont College campus. And it's a very big room. We'll have a technical person there each week with us so that we shouldn't have any challenges, hopefully, with getting the images on the screen and the microphones working and all of that. More room, nice space. We've loved our time here at the Senior Center, but we've outgrown it. So, we'll be in a new place next week. We'll put signs up in case you show up and forget and say, where is everybody? And it's the big College Hall building. On the second floor, there's a ramp and stairs to get up to the second floor, and there is an elevator as well. So we'll see you there next week. And I'm losing Chris. All right. Oh, yeah, another thing was somebody did mention that there's no public transportation up there. I think if you call ahead with Green Mountain Transit, you can get a ride. But if somebody's regularly going up the hill and you know somebody who needs a ride, see if you can connect with each other. Is there anybody that's in that position where it's going to be hard to get up the hill? Raise your hand. Okay, so is there anybody who's going up the hill who might be able to help this person getting there to get a ride? Are you in Montpelier? Oh, you live upstairs. So is there anyone who might be able to help get this person, pick her up and get her up the hill to Ole next week? Somebody who's around. Okay, this lady right here, you two should talk. All right, great, thank you. Here you go, Chris.
Okay, so first let me just see. By any chance, can't you all hear me without the microphone? All right, then I'll use the microphone. I often don't need to. So my name is Chris Hadsell, and I am the director of Curtains Without Borders. Curtains Without Borders has been around now 27 years, I think, something like that. And we have been, what we do, I am the director, but I have a team of conservators I work with. And what we do as a group is we restore historic painted scenery that was in opera houses, town halls, Grange halls, and then the occasional Oddfellows or other type of hall. But primarily it's the public meeting spaces in New England. We've also done work around the country and in other places, but we've really focused on Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And in fact, when we started, we had no idea. We didn't know what they were. We didn't know how many there were. I had never, Errol, I had never heard of the Grange at that point. I didn't know that there was such a thing as Grange, nor that their halls would have painted scenery. I simply didn't know. So this has been an adventure, and it continues. We actually have preserved 197 curtains in Vermont, but there is one more. It's in a barn in Sutton, And the owner found it just about a year ago. I've seen it. I've taken its picture. And next year, my conservator who lives up in Newark, Vermont, and I and other people, we will get it cleaned up, mended, new roller, etc. And it's going to go to the Newark school. There's an all-purpose one school in the town of Newark. Newark is only a crossroads. There's no store, there's no gas station, but they have a school, at least for now. And so that Sutton curtain is going to go to the Newark school because there's already one at the Sutton school. And they decided, even though it's by the same painter, that they didn't want two on their stage. So a lot of my work has been poking around in attics and basements and barns and you name it to try to find these large painted pieces of scenery. By large, I mean there's nothing smaller than about 16 feet by 8. That would be your tiniest curtain. They mostly range from 20 feet, 22 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, and then on up. And if they're on up, they really require a professional rigger because we're talking about scaffolding and the need to, have guys up there who aren't going to fall off. And they're heavy, after all. They're heavy, they're big. And so for many years, we worked with a rigger from Barrie who went off during COVID and has never come back. So I hope he's all right, but I can't find him. And but fortunately, we've done all the big curtains in New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. The rest are smaller so far. Any rate, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have the light stand. I'm going to turn back on my machinery, make sure it's all in focus and so forth, and I can stand up here and talk to you from up here. And I'm going to take you on a kind of a tour of the Vermont range of curtains. And what I will say before we start talking is that these are basically late 1890s to 1940. That's the latest curtain in Vermont is a 1940 curtain, except for 5 brand new ones in Saxons River. They had 5 local artists paint the 5 seasons in Vermont because you add mud season. And for each curtain, they got a major donor, a major person to underwrite each curtain. So they raised the money to put in an elevator and a accessible bathroom. And that was the way, and they're wonderful curtains, but they're all by artists who took a good look at the old ones. But they are new. And they're the only new ones actually in New England that I know about. The rest, as I say, by the 1940s, or by 1940 really, the movies had really taken hold. And every little town of any size, including Morrisville and St. Jay and every place, had a movie house because people were fascinated by the movies. They were tired of just seeing their neighbors go up and do, variety shows and maybe high school renditions of Shakespeare. They wanted the movies, and especially once sound came to the movies. So Vermont, like everywhere else, sprouted lots of movie houses. And also quite a few town halls put in a projector and a screen. And they used the town hall for movies if they didn't have their own little movie house. So by then, no money was put into stage trappings, new scenery or lights or much of anything. And the decline of the use of the stage really started and hit heavy. So many of these stages, almost all of them, are upstairs in whatever town or whatever building they're in. So along came ADA, and that was really the death knell for many of the upstairs town hall or even Grange Hall meeting spaces where they would have dances, they would have weddings, they would have all sorts of things, and the stage and their curtains, because it was no longer legal to have events. Now, of course, we all know that many small towns continued to have things upstairs, even if they weren't quite legal because they didn't have the money to put in a lift or new bathrooms. But it did really, a lot of town meetings went to schools and never came back. Even when the town halls became accessible, it was always just more convenient to go to the school building. So that was part of the decline of the use of the stages. And at this point, the only stage, there are two stages that regularly use painted scenery. One is Saxon's River Playhouse. They put on plays, and they have 10 curtains from about 1903. All kinds of curtains, you're going to see some. And then they have the 5 new ones that put in the elevator and the bathroom. So they have 15 curtains in Saxon's River, and they store them on the ceiling. They have one of these ceilings that goes up, and then a flat piece in the middle. And they cleverly built racks so that as you're sitting in the audience, above you have racks holding the wooden rollers and the scenery. Not easy to get down off the ceiling, but they're all there, and they know where they all are. And the other place that uses then town halls will use them for strawberry socials. Then the town halls that still have town meeting, Glover, Wheelock, quite a few places, they will use their curtain. But in general, they're back on their home stages, but the stages are not much used these days. So what I'm going to do is dim the lights and turn back on my stuff here, and we'll start. First of all, there's that. Then this. And you need the light for a minute? No, I don't think so. There's enough light for this. With a bit of luck. Oh yes, that would be useful. Oh, look at that. Yay!
It was self-serving, it was glaring in our eyes.
Right. Okay. So, as I say, all the work is done by a conservation team. So when we find these curtains, sometimes they're in not bad shape, but most of the time they are really dirty. They've been torn, they've been neglected, the ropes are gone or they're broken. The rollers, half the time, especially if they were made from big, long pieces of tree trunk, they've gotten warped or they've actually broken. And so there's all kinds of things that can happen to these great big pieces of canvas that we try to deal with. We mend, we clean, we do touch up with paints, not to overpaint a curtain ever, but to touch in scratches or paint that has been rubbed in a bad way. But primarily, we clean them up. And they are dirty because most town hall, well, first of all, everyone smoked all the time. And also, almost all of these buildings had a stove in the room because it was cold, especially for town meeting. So you had wood burning or coal burning stoves, and you had a wood burning furnace in the basement with a great big vent that was often right in front of the stage. So the dirt factor is pretty significant. But I'm going to show you just a range of the kind of challenges. So this particular street scene obviously probably had been caught on a nail or two as it got taken off its top boards and its roller. So there were whole chunks missing, just plain old missing. We rolled it out on the floor and said, oh, there's a big pieces missing. But what we do is we make patches out of muslin, and we use a thin film called Biva film, where you peel off one side, you iron it on the muslin, peel off the other side, and iron it on the back of the curtain. It's an iron-on patch, but it's iron-on patches made with conservation materials that can be reversed. And some of the patches are big, and some of them are 1.5 inches wide for just a simple tear. But it can be lots and lots of mending. So now there is the curtain, and there's the area that was all gone, missing bits. So what we did, you see how much wear and tear there's been across the top. We don't believe in repainting when you have lost that kind of material. Also, it's not really important to the scene. So we touch in a bit, and over here, we've basically recreated, but not in great detail. It's a fairly general recreation, but when you're 20 feet away, you don't notice it. So our goal is we have a 20-foot sort of rule that if you're not worried by something at 20 feet away, then fine. Now this is a different kind of damage. The curtain was rolled up, the ceiling leaked, and the water went from one roll to the next roll to the next roll and just took the paint away because it's all water-based paints. So when they get wet, these are called tide lines. And it's also full of dirt from the ceiling, tar, you name it, it's dirt. And the only thing we can do is kind of break up the tide lines, put a little, clean it, and then put a little paint on it. But also, this curtain had 6 inches of duct tape at the bottom, and every seam on the back, because the fabric is in seams, every seam was held together with duct tape. They wanted to keep their curtain. They didn't want to give up on it. It was either take it to the dump or duct tape it. There you go. Lots of duct tape. Pardon? What do we use to clean? Well, we use dust brushes and vacuums that are called HEPA vacs that control the amount of dust, and they have good control over the suction. So we brush, 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 and suck, suck, suck. We don't go sucking off directly, or we would take half the paint. And then we use something called a dry sponge, which I'll show you in a second. Dry sponges are also called pet hair sponges, but they're never wet. If they were wet, they would take the paint. So that's a dry sponge. That's clean and that's dirty. And that's after the curtain had been cleaned, after it had been vacuumed. But the kind of dirt that gets ingrained into the fabric, especially from coal or wood smoke, is very hard to get out. And we do our best, but often there is a sort of a shade across the top because the dirt has worked its way right into the fabric. So there is the Albany Town Hall curtain. You can still see the damage, but you no longer worry about it. It's good enough. And we took off all the duct tape. The material was all there. So we lined the bottom with more muslin like a great big huge patch. It was about 6 inches wide. And we put patches on the back of every seam. And now it rolls up and down. And they brought town meeting back to the town hall. It had been abandoned for the school, but they raised the money to put a walkway and a bathroom, And town meeting came back and they packed the place. There wasn't a seat to be had in the balcony or downstairs. The Girl Scouts sold their cookies. Everybody was happy. And they continue to have town meeting in the Albany Town Hall. Now, that's another kind of damage. Somebody stepped through, and then they tried to mend it, and they put up various layers, and it was just a total mess. This is from the Bethel Town Hall, where it's one of the few curtains that is a fly curtain. It goes straight up instead of having a roller. So this is the structure that goes straight up and down. And I mean, I could go through that hole. And there's the curtain. So the mend goes up and over, because again, the fabric was there. It just was curled under and ripped in a great big T-square or square. So once we cleaned it, we touched in the paint, and this gray was bright purple originally, but purple turns to gray over time, or brownish gray. And then they put in new, what we call velvet. Of course, they're really nylon, but new drawstring curtains that they can use for quickly going back and forth. But that's their grand drape, all back in place and all in one piece. And by the way, a grand drape, which is always right behind the arch of a stage, always has, or 98% of them have painted drapery on them, because these were all done in a time before the towns or the buildings would have drawstring curtains. So we don't ever have anything to do with the red or the blue or the green, more contemporary curtains. We're interested in the painted curtains. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about Charles Henry, because he's Vermont's most important artist. Born in Guilford, died in Ferrisburgh, died in 1918, and he painted at least 60 curtains all over Vermont, lots and lots. He also was a showman. He wrote the music, he wrote the plays. All his kids did song and dance and musical instruments, and he painted all the curtains for the sets, for the scenes that he wrote the plays for. So they are all over Vermont. And his granddaughter, he has a couple granddaughters who are still alive. No, they must be great-granddaughters by now. One lives in Vermont, one's moved to California. But they had pictures, they had letters, they had bills for some of the costume supplies. It was an incredible treasure trove to find real information about Vermont's most important curtain painter. So there is baby Grace. She went to work for WCAX for many, many years, lived in Burlington, died only in the mid-90s, 1990s. So I missed her by about 3 years. But then the couple sons, and yes, they did blackface, as did all the performers in Vermont. Any kind of vaudeville, any kind of, locally produced variety show, there would be blackface songs. And Henry was no different from the rest of them. But there he is with one of the sons playing their music. Somebody's going off. This is a Henry curtain that's down in Chittenden Town Hall. So Henry's trademark is a teaser that has got, the teaser is the top part. And when it's rolled up, when the curtain is rolled up, it's rolled up to about 2 feet, not tighter. And then that hides all the other rolls that were behind. And he always used, okay, now we go back. Always used red paint for his curtains. In this case, Chittenden put up a Civil War statue in about 15 or so, and asked Henry to come back and paint a Civil War scene on top of his stag standing by a lake. He'd done an all-purpose scene. So this is the Sons of the Revolution emblem, and there's a statue in their little town green that was obviously dedicated at the same time. And he added flags as his underpinning for his curtains. It's the only thing like it in Vermont. But this Henry, only about 2 or 3 years later, is much more sophisticated. He's got the Alps, he's got gold frame, he's even got a reflection of the gold frame in the gray below. These two pieces are called ears. They're about 3.5 feet wide, the same height as the stage. They, in this case, add to the grandeur of the grand drape. But when they're on stage, the ears provide places for actors to come in and out. So that is Saxon River's grand drape. And one of the many other scenes, the harbor scene, and this area, this is unpainted canvas, because somebody would go behind and wave a lantern behind the curtain, so you'd have moonlight coming through and bouncing off the water. They were full of special effects, all kinds of special effects. The snow scene, or we call it the snow scene, the winter scene, this is actually the little mill that stands right beside Vermont Country Store to this day. It's an old mill, and he just put it down. There's the mill. But the roof, each roof is full of mica, little chips of mica. So when a light is put on stage, on the curtain, it glitters. Very cute. This again is more Henry stuff. This is the stag standing there. It's sort of like what Chittenden looked like before they painted the Civil War scene. Again, the drapes, the teaser, and the invisible hand has pulled the drapes aside so that you can see the picture that is revealed behind. A second curtain is almost always a street scene. You'd have your guy in the top hat. You'd have maybe a little magic show, a little magic interlude, something where you don't have people because you're focusing on the person who is doing the little show in front. And you can here you can see that the roller is sitting on the floor in the middle, but the stage is not exactly straight. And over here we have a couple of ears. Here's the teaser from the grand drape. So the grand drape is now rolled up and hiding the 5 other curtains in Sudbury. Hardwick. Henry had no business painting this curtain. It's 24 feet wide, 22 feet high. It is enormous. And it's 1905, and it quite understandably got quite beat up because it's just a very heavy, and the roller was an enormous wooden roller. So the strength it took to have it go up and down, God knows how many times the ropes broke. But by the time we got to it, it had been lined by a conservation lab because they treated it like a huge painting that had been torn and needed help. So because they were not theater people and they had no idea that you can't roll 2 layers of fabric around each other, they lined it. So it had not rolled up for years and years. They literally just pulled it to the back of the stage in a kind of a great big U and tied it off. So we came along and said, no, we need to make this thing work. But we could not get off the liner. What we did instead is we had our rigger build a large aluminum roller, so it only rolls 4.5 times by the time it gets to the top. Once again, you got the Alps, you've got, that sort of stuff. Here's some of my crew working. Look at how big that curtain is. So we had to build special blocks just to hold it while we worked on it. We had to work on it in a scroll because it was too big. There was no place to put probably 50 tables end to end to make a big enough island to work on it. So those are some of my people. And then we found that there was a street scene also in Hardwick. And this again has got a new roller. It's lightweight aluminum. It's faded and well worn because it had been up in the balcony and people had walked on it for generations. Nobody knew it was up there. So we put it there. Now another Vermonter, Charles Andrus with a wonderful mustache. He came from Enosburg, and he painted many fewer curtains than Henry, but he was also a scenic artist. He also did gilding, and at one point he re-gilded the State House dome here in Montpelier. His technique is a little more primitive. I mean, he just isn't very good at painting drapery. But what I love about this one, and it's in storage at the Historical Society, Vermont Historical Society, is the biplane. And the biplane did come to Burlington in about 1905, and people took rides out over the lake in the biplane. So he commemorated the biplane in the curtain. And in Hyde Park Opera House, again, the drapery leaves much to be desired, but he was fascinated by the Civil War, and this is the Natural Bridge down in Virginia. He took a trip down to Virginia to see battlefields, as a lot of people did as a tourist. They use this curtain all the time. Now, Bobby Naves, actually born in Exeter, New Hampshire, but painted curtains in Vermont and New Hampshire. He's a younger artist. He actually ended up joining the Air Force in 1938, went to Burma, and then was killed in Burma. Not by enemy fire, but because his Jeep drove off the edge of a mountain and killed him. So, but he and a friend, or he and a cohort, traveled together. The other guy, Paul Brigham, sold the ads, and then Bobby would go home and paint the curtains on the wall in his barn. So these are some of his. In Brookfield, he painted the Brookfield Bridge as their grand drape. There's no drapery on it, but the Brookfield used to have an arch on their stage. They took it off some time ago. It's simply a scene of their bridge. And then the second curtain there is an advertising curtain, and the advertising curtain would have paid for the two. So Paul Brigham went out and sold ads, and I love it. They always have a blimp, and they are always in the form of a street, but each block of the street is made up of an ad, including ice cream down here. So that's a typical Robert Naves. I call him Bobby. He still has a first cousin who lives in St. Johnsbury. She's 90-something. She was Sterry Waterman's wife, if any of you remember Judge Waterman from St. Johnsbury. And she, too, had pictures. That's how I get the pictures of him, of where he lived, etc. I just wanted to collect some of his blimps. Oh, and actually, they're not all his. This one is in Burlington, and it's by a painter you'll see later. But this is a Bobby. Actually, there are different styles of blimps. I love the Hillsborough Dairy. That's in New Hampshire. It's a milk bottle, a flying milk bottle. People were fascinated by blimps, and they saw them often. They would see them, they'd bring a blimp to the fair. They would see them elsewhere on the news. It was, of course, before, actually, a lot of them did blow up. All right, another artist, again, she lived in central New Hampshire, but painted curtains in Vermont. And Marion Fraser is actually one of only 3 women that I found all over the whole country who was a true scenic artist. All 3 women knew each other, and they all worked in the mid-1930s. But she did Brownington. Here you got Lake Willoughby, you've got the Gap. She did lovely, soft, sort of brown velvet curtains, and then the ads that paid for it underneath. Because Granges had to pay for the curtains by selling ads. Town halls would vote the money, and then they would contract and have curtains paid. But, there are a couple town halls with advertising, but most of the time it's Granges that have the advertisements. And that is like, the same view that she must have looked at. And then her friend, Lucretia Rogers, known as Cree, also traveled through, or she and her husband traveled through northern New England. He would sell the ads, she would paint the curtains. And Cree's daughter was alive until just 2 years ago. She was 93 or 4 when she died. And Lucretia called herself the Granite State Scenic Studio. So we had found 2 or 3 curtains with that advertisement on it, Granite State Scenic Studio, but no name. And I had no idea who actually had painted these curtains. And I got an email one day from, turned out, Cree's daughter, who said that her mother remembered traveling around in northern Vermont with her mother, who painted stage curtains, and she, as a little girl, was allowed to paint in the black. And she said she remembered specifically there was a curtain with black musicians on it. And I thought, not that I've ever seen. But then I realized she was talking about black paint, not black people. But first of all, there's Burlington. There is our advertising curtain that I found at an auction in Maine, brought it home, and there is Granite State Scenic Studio. So now we know that Lucretia Rogers painted this curtain. I mean, we've got Samuel de Champlain on a statue that never was. We've got, Church Street with all kinds of high-rises, and that's her thing. But we had no way of knowing until her granddaughter just said, "Have you ever heard of my grandmother?" I said, "No, I'm sorry." But there's another one in Tunbridge Grange that she signed, Granite State Scenic Studio. And lo and behold, the black musicians. There they are. So Canaan, this curtain came from a Red Men's Hall. It was a dance hall. And all the ads are in balloons. But it was an advertising curtain. And there's one that's almost identical in Lisbon, New Hampshire as well. And as soon as I saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, that's what this woman was talking about. Black musicians. So I called her up so excited, sent a picture, and Cree said, yeah, I helped paint that curtain when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Oh, amazing. So, all right, on to the non-ladies. In Cabot, there are 2 curtains. This one was painted by a pair of people who worked for the Cabot carriage company. So normally they just did little gold lines on the fancier carriages that they made, but they got the contract to paint a grand drape for the town hall. And it's absurd. I mean, you have going west, covered wagon, oxen and things, and then you've got Italian frou-frou all around the outside, and then you've got this floral arrangement down below. It is a culturally fascinating, ridiculous curtain. The only one they ever painted and the only thing like it ever, anywhere. And it all is restored and goes up and down. But then the other curtain in Cabot at their historical society is actually their backdrop. But since they threw out the grand drape, God knows when, but a long time ago, we don't know who painted anything because only grand drapes were signed. None of the rest were ever signed. It's very competent. It's very professional. It's not a local artist, but we don't know who painted it or their lost grand drape because we have no record from them. But it's just up the street from the ridiculous Westward Ho. Now up in up in Derby Line, where the stage is in Canada and the audience is in the United States, we have a beautiful grand drape with pink drapery, gold frame, Venice, it even says Venice. There also were 5 other similarly large curtains, and we built boxes up in both balconies, and they sit up in those boxes, all wrapped in Tyvek, safe and sound, but not on stage because they need their stage for the Vermont Symphony, for other things, and they didn't want to have all these 5 scenes with all their ropes and everything that they said, well, we're not going to use them. But we have taken care that they have been saved. And Erwin Lamasse, who painted this, was born in Starksboro. We know very little about him. He went to Boston. He obviously apprenticed himself with one of the good scenic artists. And then he painted this only curtain in Vermont that we know of. In fact, the only one we've seen of his at all. But he's buried in Boston within spitting distance of Longfellow. I mean, he became quite a successful person in Boston. Now, Charles Hewist from Troy, his grandchildren turned up with photographs and everything else, and I guess probably great-grandchildren again. But I love his debonair, his hat. And he painted this grand drape in Cambridge, Vermont. It's called Dunluce Castle. The castle's actually way up there, and this is an Irish castle. There must have been people in Jefferson, Vermont who were of Irish descent. But then he also did the South Londonderry Town Hall, the scene of the Rhine. This is all painted drapery, painted teaser, painted teaser. It all rolls up behind. And he was very accomplished. He actually learned to paint in Austria before his family moved to upstate New York. Maxfield Parrish, he only painted one curtain in his hometown, and he never touched it. I mean, he did not put a brush on it. He commissioned it. So it was painted in New York, and the curtain is this part way back here. These are all ears that you could come in behind, and then this is all teaser that's been cut out and painted to look like leaves. So the actual scene is at the far back of the stage. And but he designed it, and he chose the colors and so forth, but he didn't actually paint the curtain. But there it is. In New Hampshire, we have also had a man named Charles Ives who did the most beautiful drapery of anybody we've ever seen. And he always has, there's a gold frame around the picture, but he always has lovely doodads in the curtains that sort of are his trademark. And he always has little naked people who are pulling the drapes aside so that you can see the picture underneath. That's his advertising curtain that paired with that grand drape. Again, that's where the Hillsborough blimp is. But so the street is made up of ads that he sold to pay for both curtains. Helen Tooker, the third lady, not much of a lady. She was a piece of work is what she was. But she painted in the 1930s. She painted for Granges, and she and her sister would go around. Her sister would go and sell ads. She would approach a Grange and say, I can paint your lake, whatever it is. And she'd have some sort of little demo that she would have. And then her sister would go out and sell ads. But the thing is, her sister quite often sold twice as many ads as actually appeared on the curtain. So they would wrap up, finish the curtain, and leave. They would have collected their money, but they were not going to hang around for people to say, wait a minute, I paid for an ad and it's not on the curtain. But there is this is her Vermont curtain over in Westminster West, the Historical Society over there, Ascutney Mountain, nice blue drapery, the row of ads, and a very similar one of this is in Harrison, New Hampshire. Maine, sorry. It's over there. It's a ways. It's a ways, but Errol is part of that. And always you do tend to see, for Grange curtains, a Grange symbol on almost every curtain. Now, Harry Cochran, a elegant Maine painter from Monmouth, Maine, he often didn't sign his curtains, but they always had a circular frame around the picture rather than a square one. Now, it's within a square one, but there's always a circle. And this is the goddess of reading. She's reading, whatever her name is. She's reading a book by the ocean. She's got her incense and so forth. This is in a library, and we found it underneath the stage. It had been stuffed under there. And meanwhile, the stage had become the children's library room, and they didn't want to give that up. So we hung it outside the stage opening. So when it's rolled up, it rolls up to about here and is out of the way. But that was the solution there. Here's another one of his with that circular thing, only this time, for whatever reason in Garland, they wanted to put cows in their grand drape. So instead of scene of Venice or a Roman goddess, they have local cows. But very definitely a Cochrane curtain. Also, this would have been bright green, this would have been bright pink, but they have banks of windows nearby, and for many, many, many years, it sat in the sunlight. That's what happens. Oh, and then, every so often, we find a Ben-Hur curtain. And Ben-Hur was sort of like Gone with the Wind of a previous generation. Every farmhouse had a copy of Ben-Hur. And there were Ben-Hur toys, there were Ben-Hur circus acts, you name it. There was Ben-Hur everywhere. And I love it that on the New Yorker, I found a Ben-Hur cover, just as we were working on a Ben-Hur. This one is down in Guilford, where this is a Henry curtain, where he was born. And you'll notice there are no rear legs. He wasn't very good. He got the front legs. But there it is, running around with painted the red drapes and the teaser. There are 5 curtains on that stage. And then this Ben-Hur in Maine, in Wayne, Maine, actually in North Wayne, Maine, is a whole different approach. But there you've got the same thing of having some of the white and some of the dark horses. This was on such a heavy roller that we ended up moving the roller to the back of the stage and hanging it on the back wall, because never, never again were they going to roll up this curtain on that, I don't know, 100-pound roller or more. I mean, it was an industrial thing that they'd rolled it on. So it sits there. Then this Ben-Hur is in Bristol, Vermont, and it actually is not from Bristol. Nobody knows where it came from. It turned up at UVM in a closet in the theater department. They called me and said, come get it. So I did, because they didn't want it. I didn't want them to throw it out. So we mended it and cleaned it. We got Romans up here, and we got the good guys and we got the bad guys, and brown, rather cursory drapery, but there it is. But no indication of where it come from. So I have no idea. But Bristol had lost or had thrown out its very early set of curtains from about 1900, and then had had nothing since. And it so happened that it worked really well in the Bristol Town Hall, because it's kind of an art, kind of a Beaux-Arts building that has straight lines in it. Do I have no, maybe later. In my book, which I will wave around in a minute, there's a picture of Joe's big band playing up on stage in front of Ben-Hur running around. And this one in Westminster, at the Westminster Town Hall, again is a Charles Henry. The curtain is this piece that rolls up and down. These 2 pieces are fixed, and each one of those is 15 feet wide. The whole thing goes from one side of the building to the other, 45 feet. This one had a 4 or 5 foot hole where somebody had poked something through it. So we took all 3 pieces down, cleaned them, mended them, and then when they were all put back up, this has got ropes, but it may never roll up again. It's just so massive. But there it is. And it's now used by the Historical Society because Westminster didn't want to put in an elevator. But it's quite the curtain. Now, just 2 or 3 that we're working on. So this is the curtain in Sutton, in the barn. It's a street scene. We don't know, well, we do know who painted it. It's Marion Fraser. But at the top, there's quite a lot of water damage. We'll be working on smoothing it out with weighted plexiglass pieces, and then mending it, and then taking out as much of the water staining as we can. And it's going to go to the Newark School. So it's a street scene, a modest curtain, but Newark is happy to have it. Then this one in Auburn, New Hampshire, this is actually when it was hung from a balcony at an auction. And the Grange had closed, and it was for sale. I was at the auction, And I couldn't persuade the owners to give it to the local historical society. I just couldn't. They just wouldn't do it. So somebody at the auction bought it for not very much money and gave it to the historical society. And now we'll be going probably in the spring to tidy it up, clean it as best we can with all that dirt, do a little in painting, and it's going to hang on the wall of the historical society in Auburn. It's a nice ending for that little curtain. Now this one in New Hampshire, I didn't know what to expect. This is at Camp Mowgli. And there is Mowgli with the bear and the wolves and all this, and it's completely torn right up the middle. But it was on a stage, and then it got torn and dirty, and they just stuck it away. So it's going to be a challenge. We'll need to flatten all these creases. Certainly we'll mend it. It's going to become a wall hanging. It's really too fragile to have it go up and down anymore. But there you go. And it's about 1905, something like that, maybe 1910. So we're going to work on that one. This one is in Oakland, Maine, where they are restoring an opera house. They're going to get rid of the blue paint. They're going to mend the ceiling is half falling down. It needs electricity. It needs everything. But they found the grand drape stashed under the stage. And you can see it's been worn, but that's okay. We will fix it, and it will go back on stage. But first, they need to do all their other work, because you don't want to put something up and then have all the construction dirt for the next 2 or 3 years. So we've wrapped it in Tyvek and said, well, let us know when you get the building in better shape. Same is true here. This is Machiasport, Maine, which is to hell and gone, way out, almost to Newfoundland. And they found, this is a town hall that they are restoring. This is obviously a backdrop from whatever set they used to have. It's very dirty and actually mangled and somewhat torn at the top. We're going to put it on a wall, but we're going to turn it over at just about that dirt line. We're not going to cut it, because conservators never would cut the material, but we'll turn it over and then put it up on their wall. It'll be about a foot shorter than it used to be. But the ceiling, the sky is so bad that we can't, nobody's going to want to look at that sky, even when we've worked on it. Oh, and this is just a little final word here. Bethel Grange had an advertising curtain, just a standard advertising curtain with some sort of scene in the middle and ads all around. And somebody decided instead to turn it over, upside down, paint it beige, and then this is a paper. It was a paper, big paper cartouche that they pasted on the front with glue, and then they pasted this decorative thing on it. So we said, well, okay, this is what they have. We cleaned it all up, but then, sadly, this was last winter. They had a fire, and here's that cartouche. And they wanted me, I came to see it, they wanted to see if it could be saved, and no. There's too much gone. What's left is not only filthy, but now brittle, almost as dust. It's been cooked, it's been fried. So this is definitely on the way to the dump. It's just too bad, but fires happen. The big enemies are water that leaks from the ceiling, fire, people who do things like step through them or trip over the roller, and the dump, giving up and saying, oh, it's too dirty, oh, we don't have the money, or oh, whatever, let's just get rid of it. And that does happen. But in this case, it burned. So that's that. So I was a real romp through. I wanted to say that I'm maybe turn on the lights. I'm happy to answer questions. I also, about 5-6 years ago, nobody had ever written about the curtains at all. And so it was either going to be me or nobody. So it was me. And I did a book called Suspended Worlds, which again is the best of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and with the research on the artists and all that I could find. And it was published by David Gadine, who's quite the publisher, a couple of years before he retired. So we got it just in time, because once David was gone, there is no publisher in the United States who would take on a weird little book, like a book about painted scenery. And in fact, when he retired, he produced his own book. Anyway, I pass this around and people can see I have a couple for sale. When he retired, there was a huge party for David of all the people he'd published in the last 50 years or so. And I went to the party, and he then produced a book called 50 Years of Gadine, in which he wrote sort of personal reviews of each book. Not so much the content, but what it was like to do that book. So I opened up this book of his, and we get the only double truck in the entire book. 2 pages of curtains, which was amazing. I mean, he published lots of famous people, but he gave us 2 pages and a very, very sweet essay in which he said something like, you know, when he first heard about it, he was highly skeptical, that he didn't think there was anything going to be anything particularly interesting about these curtains. Nobody had ever heard of them, and the book would never sell. But then I sent him photographs. I sent him 8 by 10 photographs that I had taken, and all of them curtains we hadn't yet treated. I mean, they were, because we were still working. And I sent him this patch, and he said, but then I looked at the pictures and I thought, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And nobody did, and outside of the people who actually lived with these things. So he said something like, never has such an arcane corner of the art world been so beautifully documented as in Suspended Worlds. It was very sweet. And he and I became great friends, having started off, really, I'd never written a book. He'd never heard of me, he'd never heard of the curtains, but by the end of it, we were absolutely on the same page. And so we've remained good friends. Any rate, that's what there is. There is no other, and I don't think anyone else will ever write a book about these. It's unlikely. So yes.
There is a picture postcard of the monthly Blanchard blog, originally called Blanchard's Opera blog.
Yes.
And it shows a curtain in there. Is that curtain lost?
Yes. Gone, gone, gone. I'm trying to think. I think I have seen that postcard. I think Michael Sherman. Oh, I should have said, back in the day, before we really even got going, Michael Sherman was one of my buddies who really helped me get the courage to go out and start conserving something that nobody had ever conserved before. And he and MJ were good, MJ Davis, the conservator, they were good friends. But he and MJ went on the road and visited. I would line up the places. I'd say, okay, next Thursday, I got 5 town halls in southern Vermont, and they're all going to be open, and they will see you. And then they would set out on these driving tours and take, in those days, regular pictures of what they found. And then, so I eventually had a sort of a big shoebox full of pictures and scraps of paper. And then there was enough to start writing grants to the National Endowment for the Arts to say, look, we don't know how to treat these. We would like to find out. Would you help us? And they did. And they helped us right through the whole Vermont era. They gave grant after grant after grant to a little rinky-dink organization like ours. It was great. I think they didn't realize that it was all being run out of my spare bedroom, but you know, we had the results. We had before pictures and after pictures, and that's what they wanted to see, the fact that we had so many local people helping us, because we required local volunteers at every site to help us so that we wouldn't have to hire just people to help turn things over or go up ladders and hammer nails. You know, that would have put the cost out of reach for most people. So we were one of the, I think we invented the idea of working right on in the room where the curtain is going to go back up. We set up tables and have the volunteers, and they would put us up and feed us, and so we could make it affordable for people.
Was Michael the director of the Historical Society at that time?
Yes. So how he found the time to do this, I don't know. But yes, he was the director at the time, but it fed right into his interest, of course, in Vermont history. And then later he stepped back once we really began the conservation part of it. But he was always there for us. And always, you know, when you write grants like that, you need reference letters. And so he was always one of my people. And, yeah.
It's one of many, many wonderful things that Michael Sherman did. And I was working at the Historical Society at the same time. He really needed and wanted to get around to discover Vermont historical societies and Vermont history. So that was great. I wanted to ask you, Chris, what is the line between conservation and restoration?
You want to write that book? There is a definite line, I think more in the heads of the conservators or restorers than in the public. Okay, a conservator, I know if you remember back when we had that first curtain that was all torn, there were pieces missing, and then when we finished it, we did not go in and repaint the whole sky. A restorer would have done that. They would not have been content to have abused looking fabric as part of the final product. But in our opinion, it was part of the story of the curtain. But there are many times when there's a nasty scratch right across the middle, and we will inpaint that scratch because it's a matter of touching. It's not a matter of taking a big stroke and saying, look, let's just cover up all the damage. It's more disguise. And then there are things like everything has to be reversible. So our patches are not bought from Walmart or any place else. We make the patches from reversible materials. And when we make new top boards, a sandwich of boards to hold it up, we put a piece of muslin between the board and the curtain to isolate it from the fabric. And that's a conservation concern rather than a restoring. You don't see it, you don't see this layer, but from our point of view, we want to make sure that the acid from new wood doesn't affect the paint layer under it. So a restorer would make it look like new. And I have met a couple restorers. But, and one time I did work with a restorer and never again. Because I stood there and thought, oh my God, if MJ were here, she'd kill me for letting her do what she did. But that was what she did. She was out to make them shiny new.
Did you have differences of opinion over this with the local people?
No. No, usually sometimes people would say, oh, can't you make it look better? And we would say, no, look, think about it. First of all, if you're 20 feet away and you're in the audience, does it really matter? And second of all, we're not going to do it. I mean, if you want something over-painted, you're talking about ending up with an item that has been forever compromised in terms of its authentic value. And most people say, oh, okay, hadn't thought about that. Yeah, no, it's not. It was a big discussion we had about various bits. You know, when does the conservation cross into restoration? And most of the time it's with, you know, if there's a place where the fabric is, the paint just worn off because it rolled up against the edges of a arch. We will try to paint that in as best we can because it's nothing to do with the scenery. It's simply to do with the integrity of the piece, but it is not changing what was already there. Yeah. Yeah. When they
When they sold advertisements in different communities, there are some curtains that you show with the advertisements around it, but when the advertisement itself was a whole separate curtain, when did those get seen and by who? Like, because they were painting the scenic part for a specific area, for a play or whatever, but the advertisements, would the advertisers keep the big curtain that the advertisements were on, or?
No, the advertising, first of all, in a Grange hall, whatever was in the middle would be surrounded by advertisements. And in the middle, you might have a farmhouse. You might have a local lake. You might have a woods. It's nothing like Venice. You're not going to have a sort of a fancy scene in the middle. You're going to have a fairly local scene, usually Mount Scottney, so something like that. And then the ads, they might only be along the bottom, or they might be all around, depending upon how many ads were sold.
Some of them were separate curtains from the thing that,
No.
well, on the pictures, they looked like a whole curtain that was.
Oh yes, the whole curtain. And usually in the form of a street, and where each building, each block of each building became an ad. And so not always. I mean, some of the advertising curtains are just patterns of ads, but most of the time it was what we call an advertising street scene. So there's and often the main ad, the $50 ad, $20 ad, would be a truck or something parked in the middle of that street. So they would get the feature ad, and they would pay a little bit more.
That would stay in the community that.
Yes, that stayed as a backdrop at the back of the stage. Usually the backs of these stages were pretty raw. You know, you had sheetrock maybe, you had plaster, you had bare brick, you had stored junk. So the backdrop hid all that stuff. And when you opened up the front, usually in a Grange, they were doing ceremonies of some sort, and the ads were perfectly, they were fine.
I pictured the ad that were sold curtain going with the scenic.
No, very rarely. Once or twice, there's a town hall in Searsport, Maine. Great big town hall, great big curtain of a beautiful ship out at sea with waves crashing. And then there are ads across the bottom. I mean, it's the only one we've seen like this, but around the rest of the country, apparently that happened fairly often. They sold the ads to pay for the curtain. That's what they did. But most of the time, an advertising curtain is a separate item from the scenery that was in front of it. Anybody else? Yeah.
The Barry Opera House found a picture
Yes.
of theirs and then had it repainted.
Yes.
And it's the scene of Venice.
Oh, you betcha.
Would you happen to know if it's the same artist that you had?
No, I got them to hire. In fact, that's the other new curtain. Come to think of it, there are the 5 at Saxon's River, and then there's the Barry Opera House reproduction from that photograph. Peter Miller, who wrote the chapter on the art of scenic art in my book, comes from Johnson. But he's worked all his life in New York City as a scenic artist. And when I went to Barry several times. You know, all their scenery is gone. But at some point, they called me up and said, we have this really good photograph of the Grand Drape. It's all in black and white. But we do have it. Do you think we could ever get it reproduced and made into a curtain? So I said, ta-da, I know the person. So I brought Peter up, and we sat down, and they looked at some of pictures of his work elsewhere and hired him. And he took the picture, and then I took him around to visit. That curtain had been by Charles Hewist, one of the artists I showed. And so we went to visit all the Hewis curtains in Vermont. There are about 5 of them. And we looked at the colors. And Peter studied the palette and the way that, everything was painted, and went home. Actually, he went to a scenic arts school in upstate New York where he teaches, and he gave it to the kids as their winter project. So, because he's teaching them the use of the old style paints, how to do perspective, when you've got something 25 feet wide, how to do all the techniques of the scenic art that's now done. Because these are kids who are going to go out and use spray paint, as a profession. But his job was to give them the historic component of their training. So in this case, he used making that curtain as his winter project for training them. They learned how to make stencils for all the gold trim. They learned how to mix the paints. They learned how to look at the photograph and transfer a photograph to something 25 feet wide. And then it came back, folded in the back of the director's Volvo, and we unfolded it on stage and raised it. It's lovely. And they are in the process, I lose track at the Barry Opera House because they are fixing things, but they are going to have fresh velvet around that will fill in the gap between, because it's no longer hanging at the very front. You see some of the side stuff. You don't want to do that. So they are putting up new so-called velvet, black side pieces and all that. And I've been trying to persuade them that they need a backdrop. Not just a grand drape, but one backdrop. And I've had talks with them about, and they actually love this idea, doing a backdrop of the Barry Granite Quarry. So it would be all stones, perhaps some machinery, and the ears would be painted with the gray and stone textures, and then you could have, so you would have the sort of iconic scene of the Barry granite in the back, but they've got other things on their mind. But Peter's willing and ready to paint that thing if they ever decide to do it. So yes, he's a treasure. He's a local treasure. Yeah.
So were the grand drapes the ones that were in front before the curtain opened, so to speak?
Well, there wouldn't be curtains in the original day. Yes.
The grand drape would be
Right behind the arch, right literally up against the back side of the arch. Yes.
and then if there was a scene, if there was a show going on,
You
how would they move that away up and roll?
You roll it up, ropes, pulleys. Roll it up, tie off the pulley and the cleat, and then you'd have your other backdrop scenes that you'd be using, your street scene, your woodland scene, your kitchen scene, whatever it might be, for whatever background you wanted. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to know how much, I know it's kind of hard to say how much time is spent, rehabbing these,
All depends on the size and the condition. But we've gotten really good. I mean, it used to take us a week to do a curtain. And when we started in Sudbury, we were slow as molasses. We didn't even know how to turn over something that was that big. Now we can do 2 or 3 in a week. And we do, if it's a single one, a couple days, maybe 3 by the time we put it up. That's it. No. Yep, we're quick, yes.
I grew up in Derby Line,
Oh, yeah.
and I know they've got a lot of the curtains. Were you involved in any restoring?
Oh, yeah, we did the curtains there, all of them. So the ones that are put away, we have cleaned, mended. They have their structures, but then they wanted them put away up in those green boxes in the balcony. So we said, okay, just don't throw them out.
Were the artists, Vermont artists,
Yes, he was born in Starksboro,
all of those were done?
but no, by the same man. Yep, and it's the only ones I've ever been able to find by him. He must have painted dozens of curtains in Boston, but he worked for some large company and didn't sign his name to them because he was an employee. He wasn't the artist, or else he might have signed them, but Boston had something like 37 opera houses. Every one of them is gone from that age. So all that scenery just simply disappeared. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be around. If anybody would like a book, I have 2 books for sale. And you also can look at the one that's out here.